2,000 years ago, Emperor Tiberius dreamed of conquering all of Europe. 200 years ago, Napoleon almost succeeded in the same, while 20 years ago, a bureaucratic post-national federation doubled in size, achieving most of the same without many of its subjects even understanding what it does. Today's video is about the European Union, which started as just 6 countries and as recently as 1990 was still just 13 member states, and although the EU shrank more recently than it expanded, it's currently in advanced negotiations with enough of its neighbours to become a 35-nation bloc in the near future. If measured as a country, this would be the 3rd highest for population, 2nd highest for GDP, and the 1st highest for smug anti-Americanism, just slightly beating out the UK. UK, by the way, is not just the name, but also what many Europeans would ask after recent events, because the EU is voluntary. After taking literally one glance at a map of the EU, almost everyone has the same question, which is why is there a big hole in it right there in the centre, and then maybe a second hole in the West Balkans, and all of those West Balkan countries are looking to join the EU almost precisely for this reason. But when you look at the other hole, it really makes you question how it is that you could ever leave the EU, because if you were to be a blob like Switzerland, then you would be stuck entirely surrounded by a single neighbour. This is nearly impossible for a state to function. The only real example in the world of this where an entire state is surrounded by one other is Lesotho and South Africa, and that's obviously a special relationship that you can't easily duplicate. I mean, just look at the EU president's eyes. Do you think you're getting a great deal from her? Anyway, the interesting thing about these countries that are outside of the EU, but very much are Western European, is they all function not by actually being entirely non-European, with the closest case of that maybe being the UK, but instead by effectively being half in and half out. This is a very weird place for a country to be, and it's a very unique one because despite having a very close trade deal with the United States, you wouldn't describe Mexico and Canada as basically being half into the country, but that's the only fair way to describe Switzerland's relationship with the EU because it is a series of treaties that they have negotiated together which cover a lot of the same things that EU members negotiate amongst themselves, and every single one of these treaties is dependent on all of the other treaties existing. In other words, that is to say, if they don't get one part of the deal, they get none of the deal, which effectively means for their relationship to continue functioning, it needs to stay at the current level or get stronger as more treaties are added, and this kind of makes it the equivalent of, two nations sign a trade deal. That's a friendship. You can be as close as you want to be, you can distance when one of you elects a weird person maybe, but you can have a friendship that builds and goes up and down over time, but the relationship is a little bit closer to having a girlfriend, where you can't just not see your girlfriend for 3 years at a time. Even when you fear she's starting to take away some of your independence and, your freedom of movement is really under question, but you can either have a relationship of nothing with her or everything. It is either break up or it is stay together and continue to build stronger. It is a very unique place for a country to be in, but this is the weird thing about the rules being made up, because the EU does have a strict set of articles and conventions that are meant to be followed, but because it is such a new entity, there has never been an EU-style body in the modern era of countries, and so we're having to work out the rules and the norms as we go along. It's sort of like how ancient warfare had strict regulations against killing the kings and queens of the opposing side. There was a divine right of kings to rule, and so you shouldn't involve them in your warfare, and that has mostly faded since, but yet here are two very different stories from the same interwar period. There was a king, a British royal rather, who was captured, but he was released into Switzerland because he's a royal and needs to go there. Well, just 20 years prior, the Red people who took over Russia were so worried about the kings coming back and eventually ruining the system that they had to execute the entire family just to be sure that no one would come back there. It's hard to know if a royal should still be treated special in the even more modern era, or if not. And similarly, the EU doesn't quite know if it wants to be treated like a country. They have their own membership of the G7, they have a parliament, they have a leader, but then all of those things don't really work in the same way they would in a country. So the laws, for example, do work how you'd expect for a union of federal states. When an EU law is written, that takes precedence over any national laws, but it is up to national parliaments to implement that own law in their own way, and so some countries kind of play fast and loose with this. There is a leader of the entire EU, and so that is a higher level leader than any national body, but also nobody's excited for the EU president to visit their country. Nobody expects that's when the trade deals are getting signed and all the important relation building is being done. No, you expect that all to be done by the national government still, which very much take precedence when it comes to foreign relations, and maybe the ultimate foreign relation of them all, deciding who to nuke, nuke, it's not done by the EU, but instead by just France now, I guess, at this point. This is a very messy situation where it's hard to even know who is responsible for doing something. When COVID came about, who is responsible for setting measures about that? Was that the EU CDC, or was that the individual national governments? Every single time there is a problem that needs to be solved by a government somewhere, the answer of which one is kind of complicated, and even more so when you look at federal states like Germany. Why is the EU such a damn big mess? Well, countries pooling resources together is generally a good thing. Economically speaking, more trade is always better for the end consumer. Likewise, the euro took a mess of currencies and managed to make them all work nicely together, but this means the convenience of its populations has been prioritized above the stability of their economies. Rather than having individual monetary control and the ability to manipulate their currencies, this power now entirely rests in Brussels and Frankfurt. Italian-made cars, for example, cannot be made competitive by lowering their exchange rate, although lowering the value of a currency is bad, so why would they even want to? In brief, governments have two types of policy: fiscal policy and monetary policy. One is the set of choices they make about what they tax and what they spend that money on, and the other is the choice in how much they ease or restrict the money supply and what they set the central interest to. Together, these represent how a country values its currency. These two need to go in tandem, as if tax receipts are too low or spending too high, the differences can be made up with monetary policy, and the currency will decrease in value to compensate the higher amount of money in the economy. This free-flowing exchange rate mechanism means that a country can make its goods more desirable overseas by deliberately devaluing its currency. A devalued currency sounds like a bad thing, and for a country's people it almost always is, but for its exporters it is not necessarily so bad. By introducing the euro, this monetary lever has been lost, and now monetary policy is decided at a central level, while fiscal policy mostly happens on a country level. There is a very small EU budget relative to its member states, and so really there is a very big diversion of powers such that you don't expect to see in the modern world, and this means that if Germany needs low interest rates while Italy needs high ones, it is very hard to find a meaningful compromise. Usually the idea of interest rates being useful in an economy is just a hypothetical, but we've just had an inflation crisis where all of a sudden the only big policy lever that a government has to control this is the interest rate, something that many countries have been using freely, but in the EU, there is a huge variance in the inflation rate, and funnily enough, it is Germany that is going through high inflation and Italy which is not, and so Germany needs a higher interest rate than Italy, but because they use the same currency, it means that one of those two countries is always going to be in a non-ideal spot. It is the equivalent of having 20 different nations having to agree about which direction to turn their car in, despite driving different cars at different speeds on different roads. It's not going to work out, in my opinion, but I guess that raises the interesting point of how the EU is not actually a single currency country, because to prove the previous point some more, the Eurozone is the zone of countries using the single currency, which notably excludes quite a few EU member states, but the more significant European achievement to many is the abolishment of internal borders. Travelling from any country in these 26 to any other requires no visa, and the right to work and access local benefits is included for all citizens of these countries. There are few rights that you have in your home country, but not while in another member state, and while to those outside Europe, this represents one of the more powerful passport rights you can get anywhere in the world, to anyone inside of Europe, it's more of the status quo. There are few rights which you have in your home country which you don't have while abroad in another European state. If you were born in France, for example, but you would be able to move to Spain, Italy, or Germany, and you would be able to enjoy the rights of being a citizen of those countries. The government would have to treat you like you are one because you are a citizen of the same wider country, the EU country, and it's weird because this passport-free zone and this free right to work is across the whole EU, but the way that the borders work is not standardized fully. For example, you do need to go for a border check when going to Ireland, but not when going to Norway, and this Schengen zone being run by the EU, the Euro being run by the EU, which also has non-EU members using it, starts to create a weird situation where effectively the European Union has control over borders and over the currency of countries from outside of itself, while not controlling those things fully for some of the countries inside downside of it. It would be akin to the United States having full control over Japan. You know, the borders for Japan, you could go there freely without requiring any passport. They use the US dollar for some reason, but also at the same time, Alabama, which is strictly a US state, you'd have to go through border control to get to. You'd have to use the local currency, sister dollars, and you know, it'd be a whole painful thing to deal with. That is the equivalent of where the EU is going as a country, which is weird as it tries to become more and more like a country. There are more and more contradictions. And speaking of contradictions, let's take a quick break to take a word from our sponsor. Are you tired of your information being stolen by data brokers on the dark web? Do you want to pay a monthly subscription to fix that problem? Wow. Well, let me tell you about... Sorry. Wrong script here. Oh, are you the leader of a European country? Are you looking to get more recognition for your state and indeed more prestige on the international stage? Would you like to trade control over your government policy in exchange for those cheap German government debt rates? Well, boy, do I have just the offer for you. You can join the European Union. You would have free borders with everything from Lapland to tropical islands to the Pope. Wow, you sure do like the Pope, I bet. And if you don't, then boy, you can pretend you don't need to be with him, because the European Union comes in lots of sizes, one for every budget. Do you want European Union membership? European Union membership plus? European Union membership minus? That deal might not be available for everyone. The EU is a membership club which anyone can join, except actually, is it? Because, to take a quick step back, the European Union is one of the few countries which is actively expansionist. It is a very rare thing. You know, the Europeans have had a very long history of being a continent where we love to expand our country overseas, but the European Union is actively saying that they want to do this, and because of the way they're doing it, it's not actively hated. And so there's an interesting thing in the way that they're doing so, because there are 3 sets of countries which the European Union are looking to expand to. It is kind of like how there are places that I theoretically could go to, there are places that I'd like to go to someday, and there are places I'm actively planning to go to. Well, the EU has a list of countries they'd be willing to accept at some point. They have a group of countries they're actively considering, and then a further group who are in negotiations to join. Those last 2 countries are Serbia and Montenegro. They were due to join in 2020, and then that became 2025, and in 2025 we'll say it's due to be 2030, but that is where Serbia and Montenegro lie. They are going to be the newest members of the European Union. Wow, add 2 countries to this group. And then the next set of countries that could join the EU are officially Albania, Bosnia, Georgia, Moldova, as well as North Macedonia, Turkey, and Ukraine. There is a potential candidate in Kosovo, which is very bizarre. These are the countries which are officially under consideration. If these countries just get their stuff together, they can join the EU. Why is Ukraine not together? That's a very fun question. I bet they've just got 2 good beaches. They just need to work on cleaning those up and making them more ugly so that too many Europeans don't migrate over there, I guess. But yeah, so there are officially, if you look right here, these are the candidate countries, but then there are more countries that could one day become candidates themselves. And who are these? Well, interestingly, the EU, again, this is from the European Commission website. You can actually see they have their enlargement strategy planned out right here. And what's even wilder about this is in every single language. This is one of the weird things about the EU having so many of them. What language should we read it in today? I'm going to go with English, just to be boring. And in this document, you can see the problems that each of these countries have. So Montenegro has taken further steps. 12 chapters have been opened. Implementation of law reforms has started. It's going great. Albania is, it's also going great. Whereas Bosnia remains at a standstill on European integration. Following elections, they need to speak with one voice to tackle urgent socio-economic reforms and to progress on its European agenda. Turkey is Iceland is and basically this is the full document that says that any European country can join if it just meets 3 basic criteria, the Copenhagen criteria, what they're usually called, and these come down to a stability of institutions, guaranteeing democracy, the rule of law, human rights and respect for protection of minorities, a functioning market economy, an ability to cope with competitive pressure and market forces in the EU, an ability to take on obligations of membership, including the capacity to effectively implement the rules, standards and basically you have to join the EU, and you have to be an EU country when you've joined, and you have to be democratic, and you can't be persecuting the minorities in your country, which is a very interesting set of terms. Also, yeah, you can't be a communist country, which was, funnily enough, a big problem until 1990. But yeah, with that said, it is now interesting to say, so if the countries that can join the EU are basically all of the West Balkans, plus Turkey, plus Iceland. Who else is eligible? And because of again, if a country was willing to become a market-based economy, any country on Earth would be eligible. Not Morocco, though, because it's not European. This sets the precedent that the European Union will only expand to Europe, or Europe-ish places. Cyprus is officially not in Europe, but Europe-ish places are able to join. And so, with that said, who can join? I would say Eurovision is a great place to look, because the European Union has made some funny ties towards Canada on this same idea. And so, you might say that in the same way, any country that's in Eurovision, a European Song Contest, would be free to enter. This includes Australia. Australia, hit us. I'm not the EU, but hit the EU up if you ever feel like joining. This includes Yugoslavia, I think is that box there. This includes Israel, potentially, although I imagine there's a kettle of fish there, as well as Russia, as you can see, Armenia, Georgia, and I think I said Armenia already, and Azerbaijan over here. The free countries which are kind of Europe, kind of not, could join. Israel, which is definitely not Europe, and maybe Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. But at that point, you start to get messy, to say for sure. But long story short, the EU could be a 50-plus member organization if every single country that is eligible joins. However, I do think that in reality, its natural cap is that they're probably not going to take on the microstates of Europe as full EU members. They might be able to be half members if they're really lucky. I think Russia is not joining anytime soon. Tell me if you think I'm wrong. Belarus is also not on any path too soon. However, I do think that expansion fully into the West Balkans, Turkey, and the Caucasus Mountains is what you can expect over the next half century or so. And yeah, as long as they're willing to follow the rules, then the EU might just be getting some member states. And ultimately, one of the interesting things about this document that I thought was weird is that really what they effectively say is there are transfer payments made in the EU from rich to poor, and so poor countries have a huge incentive to join just because they not only get access to this wider market, but also literally get money transferred to them. And so, in a way, there is a big bribe on the table if you want to join the EU, and so if you're leading a European Union membership, remember to use code TOYCAT at checkout to get 10% off. With that said, thank you for watching. Hope you all enjoyed this fun style video, because I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.